and in this video I want to talk to you about a topic that was previously unknown to me. It was proposed to me as a question at one of our club meetings, which was, what do I say to somebody who suggests that Jesus was schizophrenic or otherwise mentally ill? I started looking into this, and sure enough, out in the realm of psychiatry, there are quite a few of those who believe that Jesus was in fact not the divine Son of God, but rather mentally ill in some capacity or another. Here we have a quote: Jesus' experiences can be potentially conceptualized within the framework of paranoid schizophrenia or psychosis. Other reasonable possibilities might include bipolar and schizoaffective disorders, hyperreligiosity. It goes on to say suicide by proxy is described as any incident in which a suicidal individual causes his or her death to be carried out by another person. Another quote here: in short, the nature of the hallucinations of Jesus, as they are described in the Orthodox Gospels, permits us to conclude that the founder of the Christian religion was afflicted with religious paranoia. I want to make a special point to note they mention as they are described in the Orthodox Gospel. So again, they're using the Bible as their source of information regarding Jesus' life. Everything we know about him, meaning Jesus, conforms so perfectly to the clinical picture of paranoia that it's hardly conceivable that people can even question the accuracy of the diagnosis. I thought this was a very bold statement. Again, want to note that they mentioned everything we know about him. We'll come back to this point later. Here's a few other quotes from Psychiatry. Jesus Christ might simply have returned to his carpentry following the use of modern psychiatric treatments. And finally, for example, as we will show, a materialist readily believes, without any reliable evidence whatsoever, that great spiritual leaders suffer from temporal lobe epilepsy, rather than that they have spiritual experiences that inspire others as well as themselves. So again, before looking into this, I had no idea that there were positions or claims of this nature being levied against Jesus. But in thinking about it, it doesn't take long to note that these claims of psychiatry are easily discredited with 5 simple truths, and those are what I'd like to go through. The first of which is that the Bible accurately records history. The historical accounts found in the Bible depict Jesus, whose Hebrew name was Yahusha, or others say Yeshua. They depict him as a factual, real person. It records the names of his family lineage, as well as his immediate family. In fact, it also mentions the names of historical rulers who were contemporaries with Jesus. They were alive at the same time as him. And these details are important because they allow researchers to verify the accuracy of the Bible against other historical documents. And in fact, we do have a number of modern-day sources that will confirm or corroborate this as well. For example, the Encyclopedia Britannica, in their 2002 edition, said these independent accounts prove that in ancient times, even the opponents of Christianity never doubted the historicity of Jesus, which was disputed for the first time on inadequate grounds at the end of the 18th, during the 19th, and at the beginning of the 20th century. So the whole idea that is still circulating the internet at times, that Jesus was not even a real person, is a relatively new idea. In this book, Jesus and Archaeology, it mentions that no reputable scholar today questions that a Jew named Jesus, son of Joseph, lived. Most readily admit that we know now a considerable amount about his actions and his basic teachings. So again, this all goes to show that the Bible accurately records history, and this is actually a video teaching that I'd like to spend more time on in a future video. But there are some relevant points, particularly discoveries found in archaeology, that we're spending a brief amount of time on. For example, we just recently discovered a royal seal impression of King Hezekiah. And again, these finds definitely confirm what the Bible teaches. And a quote by Dr. Clifford Wilson says, "I know of no finding in archaeology that's properly confirmed which is in opposition to the scriptures. The Bible is the most accurate history textbook the world has ever seen. Dr. Bryant C. Wood said, in every instance where the findings of archaeology pertain to the biblical record, the archaeological evidence confirms, sometimes in detailed fashion, the historical accuracy of Scripture. Here you got a picture of the Tel Dan stele or stele. And what's noteworthy about this is this was one of the first archaeological finds that made mention of David. In fact, this fragment mentions the house of David. And before this discovery, there were some in the history community that were claiming that David was a fictitious or invented figure, that there was no historical figure, ruler of Israel actually named David. And here we have a artifact that confirms that the Bible does indeed accurately record history. Dr. Jack Cottrell said, through the wealth of data uncovered by historical and archaeological records, we are able to measure the Bible's historical accuracy. In every case where it claims that thus can be tested, the Bible proves to be accurate and reliable. This here is the Pilate dedication stone. Again, there was dissension in some of the academic realms of history that suggested that Pontius Pilate, as mentioned in the Bible as being the Roman leader at the time of Jesus' crucifixion, was again not a real historical figure. And then we find this dedication stone that mentions Pontius Pilate by name, thus soundly quieting those claims to the contrary. The reader may rest assured that nothing has been found by archaeologists to disturb a reasonable faith, and nothing has been discovered which can disprove a single theological doctrine. We no longer trouble ourselves with attempts to harmonize religion and science, or to prove the Bible. The Bible can simply stand for itself. That's Dr. Clifford Wilson, who was formerly the director of the Australian Institute of Archaeology. Another argument that's often levied against the Bible is that we cannot trust its accuracy because it is so old. It was written 2,000 years ago, and it's been changed so many times. Actually, the Bible is one of the most easily corroborated historical documents that we have. In fact, there are over 5,000 copies. I think the last count I read mentioned nearly 5,500 copies of the document. So when we test those against each other, it turns out that the New Testament, which is what we're discussing in this video, relevant to the life of Jesus, is 99.5% textually pure. In the entire 2,000 lines, 20,000 lines rather, only 40 lines are in doubt, which equates to about 400 words, and none of those affect any significant doctrine. D.A. Carson put it this way: the purity of text is of such a substantial nature that nothing we believe to be true and nothing we are commanded to do is in any way jeopardized by the variance. And people will often demand, atheists or evolutionary thinkers will often demand sources outside of the Bible as an attempt to validate it. And I understand that thinking, but it's also not unlike asking someone to define a word without using the dictionary. The Bible is our primary source for confirming the Bible. And we have to remember that this is unlike other books, and that it is actually a collection of 66 separate books written by a number of authors over a span of several thousand years on a number of different continents. And so it is actually a volume of books in itself, and so it is relevant to confirm the Bible against itself because of that fact. But there are a mention in this link here, there are a mention of other sources outside of the Bible that do definitely confirm the history of the Bible. So with all this in mind, we can confidently use the Bible as a resource to confirm the Bible. And with regards to Jesus, what is taught about him is that he is emphatically the Son of God. Galatians 2:20 says, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave his life for me. Here's a collection of just a few of the many verses that do identify specifically Jesus as the Son of God. And so it is worth taking that into account when we consider whether or not Jesus could have been schizophrenic or mentally ill. We've identified that the Bible accurately records history, and the Bible records Jesus as being the Son of God. And that is something that we need to take quite seriously when we consider the possibility of him being mentally ill. The second point is the fulfilled prophecy that is recorded in the Bible. In the course of his lifetime, Jesus fulfilled over 350 prophecies that were written about the Messiah in the Old Testament. And there's a book, actually, that takes a fascinating look at this fact, written by Peter Stoner and Robert Newman. It's entitled Science Speaks, and the book was based on the scientific probability, and this was actually vouched for by the American Scientific Affiliation. It set the odds of any one man in all of history fulfilling even just 8 of these prophecies. They ran the math, and they found that the probability that Jesus or even one man could have fulfilled just 8 of such of these prophecies would be 1 in 10 to the power of the 17. That is 1 in 100 quadrillion. That's an enormous number that is sometimes hard for us to put in perspective. So in an effort to kind of explain that, Stoner came up with this analogy. He claims that an equal number of silver dollars would be enough to cover the face of the entire state of Texas 2 feet deep. Who in their right mind would suppose that a blindfolded man heading out of Dallas by foot in any direction would be able to, on his very first attempt, to pick up one specifically marked silver dollar out of 100 quadrillion? So here we have a map of the state of Texas, giving us the perspective. It's nearly 270,000 square miles. And if we covered the entire state of Texas 2 feet deep in stacks of silver dollars, what are the odds that we could, on our first attempt, pick up one specially marked quarter? And that is an illustration of the probability of one man being able to fulfill just 8 of the over 350 prophecies that Jesus fulfilled. And so you have to ask yourself, when you consider this claim, does it seem reasonable that a mentally ill person could have knowingly accomplished such a remarkable goal? It would seem impossible to assume that any person, for that matter, could have accomplished such an improbable task. And so again, this would confirm what the Bible records of Jesus as him being the Son of God. But perhaps even more compelling are the many public miracles recorded in the historical accounts of the Bible. Jesus performed, as the Bible mentions, it records 37 separate miracles that Jesus performed. And the thing to remember is that these miracles were not performed in private. In fact, they were performed in front of dozens, hundreds, and sometimes even thousands of witnesses. And so again, this would completely nullify the claims that Jesus could have been schizophrenic or mentally ill, because there would have to have been some kind of collective hallucination that would allow everyone witnessing these miracles to be seeing and experiencing the same things. It's also worth mentioning that the gospel accounts were written within the lifetime of most of the witnesses to these miracles. And so as these early writings were being circulated, if anyone was in doubt, it would have been very easy to go and confirm these from eyewitnesses to the events that were still alive and present. And so if any of these events did not occur as they were recorded, it would have very quickly been revealed, and these documents would not have been proliferated into history as established fact. There's also a verse worth mentioning from John, chapter 21. It said, "And there are also many other things which Jesus did, that which, if they should be written every one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that should be written." So again, just these 37 miracles are the tip of the iceberg in terms of what Jesus actually did during his lifetime. And again, that seems to soundly refute the idea that he was schizophrenic or otherwise mentally ill. But again, even more powerful evidence exists, and that would be the resurrection and the ascension. If Jesus was simply a mentally ill guy that convinced a few people that he was God, I propose that Christianity today would not exist. we've seen this happen a number of times in modern day era, in which you have a religious zealot or some kind of charismatic teacher that amasses a small following and convinces them that he's some kind of godlike or messiah figure. And shortly after he dies, it's confirmed that he was just a person, and the movement almost immediately dies out. However, what we see from Jesus when he dies is that Christianity explodes in growth. The apostles were so emboldened in their belief that Jesus was the Son of God, and that's because they actually physically saw him rise from the dead, and then even more miraculously, they saw him visibly ascend into heaven, thus proving without a shadow of a doubt that he was in fact the Son of God, just like the scriptures had taught for millennia before he arrived. They didn't just believe he was God, they knew he was God because they saw it happen. And because of that, they had the confidence to boldly go forth and begin to spread the good news of the gospel. And if Jesus had been mentally ill, it's plausible to assume that the New Testament likely wouldn't have been written at all, because again, he would have died and the movement would have ended, and we probably wouldn't even know his name in this day and age. Case in point, chapter 2 of the book of Acts records the day of Pentecost, in which 3,000 new believers were baptized in a single day. If Jesus had not physically resurrected from the dead and then been seen by hundreds of witnesses and interacted personally with these people and then ascended into heaven in front of eyewitnesses, there's no way he could have been schizophrenic and mentally ill. Now, the final reason actually came to me as I was putting together this presentation initially, and that is the psychiatrists themselves, in trying to create excuses to explain away the historical accounts of Jesus, they had a need for an excuse. And in forming this diagnosis of Jesus, they're intrinsically implying that the historical accounts of scriptures were true. I mean, it begs the question, if it's not true, why do they need to explain away the details of those historical accounts? And you see the psychiatrist here in the cartoon quoting what we heard before, that everything that we know about him conforms so perfectly to the clinical picture of paranoia. I mean, suggesting mental illness for Jesus' symptoms implies that they believe what the Bible teaches about Jesus, they just don't want to accept it. And so they have a need for an excuse to explain away what the Bible says about Jesus. This is exactly the same rationale used by the Pharisees in trying to explain why Jesus' tomb is empty. I mean, by offering an alternative solution, they're validating that the facts are indeed true. And that takes us right back to our initial point. So to review here, we've got accurate historical records in the Bible and in other texts that confirm the teaching that Jesus was the Son of God. We have over 350 fulfilled prophecies in one lifetime, and we've got statistical analysis that would suggest the probability of one man even fulfilling 8 of those prophecies is astronomically improbable. We've got public miracles being performed in front of countless eyewitnesses. You have a physical resurrection from the dead, with witnesses seeing him bodily ascend into heaven. And then you have a need for an excuse from the very psychiatrists who are trying to discredit the historical accounts of the Bible concerning the life of Jesus. So in conclusion, I think it becomes very obvious that Jesus is indeed the Son of God and was in no way schizophrenic or mentally ill. And this brings us full circle to a very important point out of the book of Romans, that if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. And the converse is true as well. Without an acceptance of the work of Jesus, without being saved by faith through grace, then there's no chance that we can expect the peace and comfort and the promise of heaven that is through faith in Jesus. Thanks for watching.